One of the things I like to do when I'm researching old fly patterns and reading about the history of our sport is stop by Pennsylvania Angler magazine. The Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission has done all of us amateur historians a great service. First off, they have one of the best monthly magazines of all the state wildlife departments out there. But what's more, they have posted every issue online all the way back to 1931 as searchable PDFs. So what I'll do sometimes, if I've got an hour or two to spare, I'll go looking through their old issues, just find something interesting to read. So let's try that. Let's pick something from the 1930s. How about this one, 1935? Let's check out April. Then I'll just find an article to read. Here's one, Will Rainbow Trout Thrive in Pennsylvania? Well, I think we know the answer to that one. Their site really is a treasure of old, interesting articles. Now, it's easy enough for you to find out there, but I'll put a link to it in the description. So that's what I did last night. I found an April 1939 article by Clayton L. called 12 Dry Fly Aces. And the writing itself was pretty interesting, but what you can really learn from an 80-year-old article like this is the types of flies they used back then and how they fish them. A lot of them are the same patterns we still use, like a March Brown or Royal Coachman or Wickham's Fancy. But occasionally you'll find something that you've never heard of, or maybe it's just a different take on a familiar pattern. And that's what I found yesterday. It was a Bivisible, and I know a lot of us have tied and fished the Bivisible before, but the one Peters called out in this article was a badger Bivisible. And it got me wondering, how did they tie something like this out of a badger neck with the quality of hackle they had 80 years ago? And then I thought, well, I've got some crappy badger hackle. Let's give it a try. So what you're about to see is what I think a fly tied from this recipe in this magazine 80 years ago might have looked like. Now I could tie a much cleaner, crisper, Bivisible fly like this with today's nice genetic hackle. We all could. But I thought it might be fun to pay a little tribute to Clayton Peters and tie this fly like he or his readers might have done back in 1939. And this one I'm about to tie, it's definitely a shaggy looking fly, but you know what? I think it's still a fishable fly. So there's one in the vise, a badger Bivisible, tied pretty much how it would have been tied back in the 30s and 40s, meaning not using real high quality genetic hackle. And you can't tie these too small, cannot tie them too small. This is a size 12, standard length barbless dry fly hook, a Daiichi 1190. And I doubt the thread color really matters. I'm going to use black. This is 70 denier. I'll put a base down to the bend. And I am going to tie in a tail. I'm just going to use some of the barbs from one of these badger feathers that I'm going to be using. And maybe a dozen or so, and about a body length. Now let's snip that off and leave our thread in the back for catching in these first hackle feathers. And I'm going to use two of the smallest feathers from this badger neck piece. They're still going to have some pretty long barbs, but I'm going to catch them in both at the same time. But then I'm just going to wrap one at a time. So let's try to create a little tie-in point right here. And now if I didn't mention in the intro, these flies are kind of buggy, kind of a big mess of a fly. The few that I've seen have been anyway. So let's go ahead and catch this in and snip the front off. Okay, that's fine, close enough. And I'm going to put my thread about 2/3 up, because the back 2/3 is going to be this badger, and then the front third will be a white hackle. So let's just go ahead and wrap this up. I'm going to do one at a time. The only thing you need to keep in mind here is when you're wrapping that second one, try not to trap too many fibers when you're wrapping it up through the first one. So there we go, big fuzzy mess so far. Now this next scraggly feather, I'm going to try to just wrap it up through here, zigzag it a little bit, and just try not to trap too many fibers going forward. And I would have probably been smart to try to use my hackle pliers there, as I was running out of feather, but we're fine. We've got enough hackle right there, so I'm going to just Try to pull these back, create a little flat spot for my front hackle. And like most bivisibles, the front is going to be a white or usually a lighter color. So I want to use a white, and I'm going to try to pick a feather with the, the barbs about the same length as those I just put on. So we'll catch this in right in front of that badger. And let's see. Okay, that should work. And I'm going to leave that stem in place and just catch it in up front before I snip it. That way I won't create an artificial little bump there. Now just wrap this white, 5 or 6 wraps to cover the first third of the hook. Now just push a little bit of these back, try to create some space for your whip finish. Now a big buggy fly like this, there's not really a lot you can do for cleanup. Maybe take your bodkin and pull some of these fibers out. But really that's it. Just a big, fluffy, pom-pom looking fly. Drop a head cement on there and this guy's ready to go in your box. So that's it, a badger bivisible from a really old 1930s reference. So I appreciate you watching, everybody. Y'all take care and we'll see you next time.